almost a false sense of hope. So why not celebrate where we are? I guess that's my real question is,
Well,
celebrate that we're good people and 99.9% of us are never going to kill anyone.
well, let me make a couple of points. First of all, thanks to your husband for his service, and thank you for your service, because extraordinary heroism that he and your family have shown in protecting all of us, and I'm very grateful for that. Number two, what you said about murder rates and violent crime generally is something that we don't celebrate enough. The fact of the matter is that violent crime has been steadily declining across America for a pretty long time. And you wouldn't always know it by watching television, but overall, most cities are much safer than they were 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Now, I challenge the notion that the reason for that is because there's more gun ownership. Because if you look at where are the areas with the highest gun ownership,
Up to people in our audience. A lot of people
Absolutely.
have traveled far. I want you to meet Taya Kyle. She's the widow of Chris Kyle, former Navy SEAL, author of American Sniper. Taya wrote a book, American Wife, a memoir of love, war, faith, and renewal. Taya, we're happy you're here. What do you want to ask the president?
No, I appreciate you taking the time to come here. And I think that your message of hope is something I agree with. And I think it's great. And I think that by creating new laws, you do give people hope. The thing is that the laws that we create don't stop these horrific things from happening, right? And that's a very tough pill to swallow.
Right.
We want to think that we can make a law and people will follow it. But by the very nature of their crime, they're not following it. By the very nature of looking at the people who hurt our loved ones here, I don't know that any of them would have been stopped by the background check. And yet, I crave that desire for hope too. And so I think part of it, we have to recognize that we cannot outlaw murder because the people who are murdering, right, they're breaking the law, but they also don't have a moral code that we have. And so they could do the same amount of damage with a pipe bomb. The problem is that they want to murder. And I'm wondering why it wouldn't be a better use of our time to give people hope in a different way. To say, you know what? First of all, actually, let me back up to that. Because with the laws, I know that, at least at last I heard, the federal prosecution of gun crimes was like 40%. And what I mean by that is that there are people lying on these forms already and we're not prosecuting them. So there's an issue there, right? Mm-hmm. But instead, if we can give people hope and say that also during this time, while you've been president, we are at the lowest murder rate in our country, all-time low of murders. We're at an all-time high of gun ownership, right? I'm not necessarily saying that the two are correlated, but what I'm saying is that we're at an all-time low for a murder rate. That's a big deal. And yet I think most of us in this country feel like it could happen at any moment. It could happen to any of us at any time. And I'm almost finished. Just when you talk about the NRA and after a mass shooting that gun sales go up, I would argue that it's not necessarily that I think somebody's going to come take my gun from me, but I want the hope, and the hope that I have the right to protect myself, that I don't end up to be one of these families, that I have the freedom to carry whatever weapon I feel I need, just like your wife said on that farm road. You know, the sheriffs aren't going to get to my house either. And I understand that background checks aren't necessarily going to stop me from getting a gun, but I also know that they wouldn't have stopped any of the people here in this room from killing, and so it seems like almost a false sense of hope. So why not celebrate where we are? I guess that's my real question, is celebrate that we're good people, and 99.9% of us are never going to kill anyone.
Well, let me make a couple of points. First of all, thanks to your husband for his service, and thank you for your service, because extraordinary heroism that he and your family have shown in protecting all of us, and I'm very grateful for that. Number two, what you said about murder rates and violent crime generally is something that we don't celebrate enough. The fact of the matter is that violent crime has been steadily declining across America for a pretty long time. And you wouldn't always know it by watching television, but overall, most cities are much safer than they were 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Now, I challenge the notion that the reason for that is because there's more gun ownership. Because if you look at where are the areas with the highest gun ownership, those are the places in some cases where the crime rate hasn't dropped down that much, and the places where there's pretty stiff restrictions on gun ownership. In some of those places, the crimes dropped really quickly. So I'm not sure that there's a one-to-one correlation there. But I think the most important point I want to make is that you will be able to purchase a firearm. Some criminals will get their hands on firearms even if there's a background check. Somebody may lie on a form. Somebody will intend to commit a crime, but they don't have a record that shows up on the background check system. But in the same way that we don't eliminate all traffic accidents, but over the course of 20 years, traffic accidents get lower. There's still tragedies. There's still drunk drivers. There's still people who don't wear their seatbelts. But over time, that violence was reduced, and so families are spared. That's the same thing that we can do with gun ownership. There is a way for us to set up a system where you, a responsible gun owner, who I'm assuming, given your husband and your family is a much better marksman than I am, can have a firearm to protect yourself, but where it is much harder for somebody to fill up a car with guns and sell them to 13-year-old kids on the streets. And that is, I think, what we're trying to do. What we're also trying to do is make the database more effective. So that's part of the proposal, which, by the way, will convenience you when you go to the store, because if we can set up a 24/7 background check system, then that means that it's less likely that things slip through the cracks, or it's more difficult for you to get your background check completed. And we're also trying to close a loophole that has been developing over the last decade, where now people are using cutout trusts and shell corporations to purchase the most dangerous weapons, sawed-off shotguns, automatic weapons, silencers, and don't have to go through background checks at all. And we don't know whether, are these sales going to drug traffickers? Are they? We don't know who's purchasing them right now, and so what we're saying is, you know what? That is something that we've got to do something about. The same thing is true with internet sales, where one study has shown that 1 out of 30 persons who are purchasing weapons over the internet turn out to have a felony record. And that's not something that you want to see.
I think one question a lot of people have about you is,